Hi, everyone. My name's Emily, and I'll be hosting today's panel along with Giulia. And today we're going to be talking about conversation design best practices. And I feel like this is something that, I don't know, we don't really talk about as much as we should. So I just kind of wanted to bring people and get some insights into what we can be doing to make sure conversations are resonating with users and going the best that they can. So let's start with a round of introductions. EJ, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for having me in this wonderful panel here. But I'm EJ McGuire, conversation designer based in Wilmington, Delaware, the East Coast. So I've had the privilege of designing conversations in various industries, starting from education, finance, home entertainment, and a few others. And just so I'm excited about sharing my perspective and also learning from the other panelists as well.
Valentina?
Hi, everyone. Excited for this panel. Thank you for having me, Emily and Giulia. My name is Valentina Adami. I'm a conversation designer. I joined the conversational AI industry in 2018. I've been focusing on voice-first applications. And as a background, I have over 20 years of experience in the information technology field, 10 of which spent in the insurance sector. Curious to listen to others.
Awesome, thank you. Soo-Jin?
Hi, everyone. Again, thank you to Emily and Giulia for creating this space and inviting us. I'm excited to be here. So I'm glad, EJ, you were talking about education. I'm a former English teacher and also a playwright, pivoted into conversation design a little over 2 years ago. And currently, I am parked at Google working as a conversation designer in the Google ad space. So that's been really exciting. And I am located right outside DC in Northern Virginia.
Melody?
Nice to be here. Yeah, I'm Melody Kim, and I'm a content and conversation designer based in San Jose, California. So I'm in between jobs at the moment, but my specialty has been virtual assistants. I've also taught conversation design and generative AI product design at my previous company, Cisco. Really excited to be here and learn from everyone and share what I know.
Yeah, thank you all for joining. So the first question I have is, what are the top things people get wrong when designing conversations? So Soo-Jin, you want to start with this one?
Sure. So when I did my first conversation design portfolio, I had worked a few months with 2 contracts, so startups, and I was just creating happy paths. And so when I was putting in work into my portfolio, what happened during my walkthrough interview, where you have to explain your work, that panel interview, they kept asking, so what happens if this happens to the user or this doesn't work? And I was like, oh my God, I didn't prepare for my exam. So I realized that in the conversation design space, it's not about the perfect journey, but we have to keep thinking about, oh, what if the API doesn't work, or user doesn't know how to answer, or they don't understand our question. You have to, be prepared when things go wrong in almost every single angle, so that you can give them the smoothest journey possible. And I think it's not anticipating the unhappy paths. And sometimes when you do user testing later, you get to see that, because people will tell you if you ask them, and they're like, I was frustrated because of X. So think about unhappy as well as happy paths.
Melody?
Yeah, I love that so much. It's actually what I would have said as well. You have to design for all the unhappy paths, and as well as the happy paths. And I think that becomes a lot trickier when you're talking about designing with LLMs, because there's just so many things that can go wrong, as opposed to when it's the conversation's more fixed. Another thing I would say, as someone who comes to this field by way of content design, I have noticed a lot of the same mistakes apply. Just on a more writing level, the primary thing, just on a voice and tone level, the primary thing I've noticed is kind of this tendency to over-explain basic user interaction, type your answer below or click the button. So I don't know why, but I've noticed it's kind of worse with chatbots, and like I think I kind of attribute that to like how small this field is. There's a lot of poorly designed chatbots out there. So that's one thing that I've kind of noticed. Maybe on the other end of the spectrum, like going from really robotic sounding conversation, you also get writers who go all in on the conversational like aspect, and they put a lot of unnecessary verbiage, like, you know, because they're really excited about like designing this persona, and maybe they go a little bit into it too much.
Definitely. Valentina?
Well, I think that many things might go wrong when designing conversations. I think that the three top most common ones are not knowing your users. And the second one is overcomplicating the interactions. Users just need natural, engaging conversational dialogue. And the third one is not designing for error recovery, because error in communication will happen. This is a certainty. It happens also in human-to-human communication. So you have to be prepared for the repair and go back to the original dialogue. So you have to put guardrails to get the dialogue back on track. And I think these are the main things that go wrong. But obviously, there are others mistakes that for sure I have made, I'm sure, and I'm proud of, because these errors taught me valuable lessons, and I learned a lot. So embrace failure.
Can I
EJ? Oh, go ahead.
I just wanted to, I like the points that you made, Valentina, and I just wanted to double click on the don't annoy your users. Like, what is it that you mean with that, just to be clear on it?
Yes, you're right. Don't annoy your user. I'm thinking of, for instance, be concise, be very brief, don't use slang, don't use too technical words, since you are obviously the domain expert, but it is not guaranteed that your user will understand as well. So be very empathetic. Try to work in others' shoes and try to understand what they are feeling that moment when they interact with your conversational assistant. So be ready for that.
EJ?
Yeah, you know what? Some wonderful statements, and everyone kind of pretty much touched on like the core use cases where things kind of go wrong. Aside from the very broad things of not seeing things from the user perspective and being empathetic, like Valentina mentioned, I can think of a specific case where we're kind of overwhelm users with too much information, like violating crisis maximum, right? Just think of a disambiguation where we're kind of asking the user to choose between 3 to 4 different choices in a single turn, and that might just be overwhelming. So something like that, you maybe want to either try to leverage a signal that you can have on the customer, what their interests are, things that they may prefer. And you may want to, instead of trying to disambiguate on 3 or 4 different options, maybe confirm a choice that you may have a strong signal that they prefer. So do you like A, B, or C? Or instead of that, you can say A, right? Simple, way of maybe just kind of streamlining the conversation, to make sure the customer kind of, one, you let them know, hey, I happen to understand our relationship here with the organization, know some of your interaction patterns from the past, and maybe want to kind of leverage those into the conversation. So I think that's a key one that I've seen, kind of overwhelming the customers with too much information that is not relevant, and kind of making the choices difficult for them in that small window of time that we have for them to make a quick decision.
And I'm actually going to build on that. So does that differ? Overwhelming information, I know that happens definitely for voice, but do you feel like that also happens for chat as well?
I believe so, because information that is not relevant, like click here or select this, there's a different way that you can maybe frame that. But just sometimes there's just too many words because you have more more real estate that you can use, and then sometimes there are just so many words that are not necessarily relevant, or like if you were to take them out, extract them from the conversation, will the core I guess foundation of that sentence structure break? And I wonder, so I like to do, like I got it from CDI, but use the Jenga method. Just try to pull as many words out of that sentence or phrase as you can without breaking the core structure of it. So I see it the same way in chatbots as well, but specifically in voice assistants. But you can, the same principle applies when you deal with chatbots as well.
Yeah, I think on this one, it's like sometimes you think like, oh, if I give it more, then they will get more. But sometimes it's like, if it would be less, they would actually be reading that and not just skimming for parts, and they would really understand what's happening there.
Exactly.
I also see a question from the audience that I feel like would be nice to plug right away since we're talking about it. I found sometimes overcomplicating the interaction path comes from well-intending business team members who want reporting. Can you touch on how to deal with this? Maybe EJ?
Yeah, I was going to say that. Yeah, I'll kick us off. So I think when you're interacting with stakeholders, it's important to take their input into consideration because they have a key perspective, right? It's all coming from a well-intended place, but I think it's up to the expert, us being the conversation designers, to kind of educate how and why ways that we can actually use and inject their ideas in a way that benefits the customer as well. So there are times where someone may suggest a writing choice or a phrase or things that we should say or include within an interaction. And it's really up to us to determine, hey, does that fit within this particular interaction? And you really got to make a tough choice sometimes. So navigating that with your stakeholder is just an education in a conversation. One, try to determine what's the reason that we want to add this, and maybe even mock it out. Sometimes you can do like a conversational flow to see what it would look like and do various versions of it to say, okay, I've considered your idea kind of the way that you laid it out. Here's what it looked like. Here's the anticipated outcome. Let's take a look at the pros and cons of it. Also, here are some suggestions that I'm doing, recommending that you also should consider, based on what you're hoping to accomplish. So understanding what the outcome is, I think that really helps, because then you can kind of design your conversational path towards that outcome. And then while still educating your stakeholder while you're either amending the recommendation, so to speak, or recommending that we go in a different path. Because it really should be about something that's measurable, that, hey, if we do it a certain way, we're going to improve the CSAT scores, or we're going to improve the customer interactions for a particular feature or to particular experience. So that's kind of really been my experience. One, educating your stakeholder, and two, just kind of letting them see it in real time, mocking out the flow.
Does anyone else have any thoughts on that?
Let me chime in just for a moment. I dare to say that this is not strictly related to conversation design, but is a sort of soft skill that you have to develop in your career, because that will happen in other contexts. And so I agree with EJ. You have to educate the stakeholders, and you have to make them understand that, yes, okay, the business logic is important, okay, but the users also are important, because they are your customers, your clients. And so I think that this is more sort of a personal trait also. It is about you as your personality. You have to be, how do you say, authoritative. So you have to make the voice of the user be heard. I think this is our most important task as conversation designers.
Absolutely. And I know, Melody, you've done some education stuff. So I was wondering, like, in terms of best practices, how did you kind of determine like what to share with them and how deep to go? And did you find that there was an understanding already, or did you feel like there was, you had to start from scratch?
Sorry. So I think the way that looks is going to depend so much on your project and your team and your company and how much awareness there already is about design and the importance of design. In my case, I felt like a lot of the times I was starting from scratch. Like a lot of people had never heard of conversation design. There certainly weren't many conversation designers at our company. So that I don't know that I did it the right way. I kind of just started out with like developing a set of guidelines and kind of just like taking some time and making everyone sit through that and like a presentation on like what it is that I do, what it is that I don't do, aka like don't bring me in at the end to just like fix copy. Like I'm actually supposed to be more involved throughout the entire process. And this is like, some kind of, because conversation design is kind of a fun topic. It's, I've found that people actually enjoy learning about like, the principles and stuff like that. It's an easy kind of thing that for people to get interested in. They're like, oh, okay, that's what you do. So just kind of starting out with those guidelines and putting that into people's heads. And I think the good thing about kind of formalizing those guidelines is that like I ended up working on other projects where that question kept coming up over and over. So I was able to share those out and it kind of became more formalized. That's one thing I guess I did as a starting point.
Sweet. And in terms of Soo-Jin, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to quickly add, sometimes if the stakeholders want it, build it fast, let it crash and burn, and then you move on to the next. You know what I mean? Instead of this whole power struggle back and forth. Previous place I worked at, I was working on a project and I always like to go back to the chatbot to see, oh, did they launch that? And maybe it did for a hot second and then they had to shift gears. But it's like, test it out. And what's kind of exciting at Google, I thought, was how quickly we build, and then you test it out on the audience, the customers that are out there, and then you shift gears, or you try this, and so it's kind of not like waiting for it to be perfect and then launch, but it's like testing out, and then also quickly interacting. I feel like, in a way, design, I know the longer it takes, the more money you're using up, the resources. But if there is this idea and they're really hot about it, then, let's see if it works. And I like how EJ said, bring a couple of solutions, so you have a backup plan. So I don't know. I feel like if you have the resources, test it out on the people and they will tell you, you know what I mean? Or you can get the data.
We did have a question about data and how do you measure success for the business or the user? Does anyone want to chime in on that? I mean, I guess there are a lot of metrics you can kind of go, but go ahead.
I'll just hop in real quickly. What I've seen in the places that I've worked at, we look at the click-through rate. And so if we give a message and, people are passing through to the next, that's almost like, oh, we engaged you and you tapped a button to move forward, versus if they opened up the chatbot and then closed it immediately, like obviously that's not a good sign. And the other piece would be user interviews. So one of the places I worked at, it was exciting because I got to sit in and listen to a live, back and forth, a UX researcher talking to a customer, showing them, work that we're going to launch and what are their thoughts on it. And they were so helpful. I'm like, are you a designer? Because you are giving great feedback. You're going to take our jobs. No, but it was great because they're the ones familiar with the tools that we've built. And then they'll tell us this is working, that's not working, and then the reasons why. So just go to the customers if you have that, luxury of time and the people who can do that.
I'd also like to add, like, as someone who didn't necessarily have access to all the latest data. I don't think this is ideal, but like one thing I have done, just because I didn't have customer data to work with all the time, is just kind of doing your own heuristic evaluations and kind of working with internal stakeholders to like kind of gauge like how it's going. So again, not ideal, but an option for people who are in this position of not getting access to data.
A few things that come to mind, just in addition to what's already been stated, like how many of your users or your customers are actually coming back to use your assistant, right? So that could be a good sign, right? If you have people who are returning to use your chatbot or your voice assistant, that could be a good sign. And if you have data to see how they're actually moving and interacting throughout your chatbot or your digital assistant, that's also helpful as well. Because what that could signal is if you have a bunch of people kind of stopping at a certain interaction point, and you do some investigation to figure out like what's happening here, like are we providing the right responses or something like that, or you may find a technical issue like people dropping off because maybe an API is failing at a certain interaction point. So that's kind of helpful too. So I like to look at return users, return visits. That's helpful, and also just to see the customer journey and how many different I guess conversational terms that they may be using, and where many people are kind of interacting or kind of gathering, so to speak, and to see, one, if is it very useful to the customers, and two, or is there a technical issue that's not preventing them from going any further? So those have been some really just tactical things that I've done on a tactical level that have yielded some positive results.
Yes, I agree with EJ. There are two sides, the strategic point of view and the technical one. And speaking of the first, sometimes it is very difficult to identify the correct KPI to understand, to measure the success. And speaking of the technical issues, well, I think, in my opinion, they are simpler to address since you might have to monitor the performance, the technical performance, the natural language understanding, the percentage of success of a recognition. And that could be sometimes easier than a strategical, from the strategical point of view. But it's very difficult because customers sometimes just don't know what they really want. And you have to ask a lot of questions to identify what could turn out the best possible outcome. So I usually ask, okay, now let's take into account a certain use case. You have 100 emails. What about if we could reduce them by 50% via a chatbot? That could be a good starting point, in my opinion.
Yeah, thank you. I kind of wanted to bring it a little bit back to best practices and kind of ask you all, where did you learn best practices? And if you have any resources that were helpful, or if it was more like experience, yeah, anyone who can share.
Sure, I can start. So various places. So I started, I got my first, I guess, conversation design best practice from CDI, Conversation Design Institute. It seems like a starting point for many folks. So that was a great resource that I leveraged very early on my conversation design path. And aside from that, just trial and error, testing, experiments. As Soo-Jin mentioned, just trial and error, testing, getting feedback from users, and then you learn how to kind of like design your experience based on what their needs are. So you learn the technical aspects of what conversation design is, and you learn the historical thing, like how do we actually get to what we define as like modern conversation design from previous eras, but also working with the customers. So if you can design, quickly test and prototype and get experiences out in front of people and just let them interact with it, they'll tell you what's good about it, what's bad about it, and you learn from that, and you just apply those various principles. So one, CDI Institute worked for me, and also just testing with customers, getting my experiences out in front of them.
I want to add so much I learn with sort of, your managers, if they can pass on their wealth of experience. And one thing that I heard early on in my career from a friend and mentor was to fail early, fail fast. And that's what a lot of CEOs say too when they're trying to, launch their companies and whatnot. So you can get to the best version or what have you. But I feel like, I guess you can stay in one company for 20 years. I don't know anyone who's done that. Well, obviously in conversation design. I mean, some people started way back when on the IVRs, right? But I feel like nowadays when I have been, shifting my workplace and going to join another team, I notice how they do it differently. And that is always education for me, because what is their approach? Who kind of holds the power, or, who is the real stakeholder or what have you, or do they genuinely work as a team? And you learn, oh, this is a very healthy way to function. I like this. And then, hopefully you carry that on, that culture or style of working together. I feel like it's when you do hop companies, you also get to use different products for different customers. And I know you can get this experience if you're at a consultancy and you have a bunch of clients. So, maybe, but working with different designers and product people, I've picked things up like, ooh, I like the way you do that. It's like if you're, a performer, musician, and you play with a bunch of different bands, then your sound can get like more interesting and, other possibilities. So I know hopping around is very stressful, job hunting and all of that. But in a way that also, it's a quick education on how to do it. And I know EJ mentioned CDI a few times. I took the conversation design course, got the certification way back in the beginning, and I learned a lot about sales actually, and microcopy and just like those practical pieces. And I'm like, ooh, I can chew on this. This is digestible. And and so I appreciated that. That was a start. But then when you start your first contract, then you have to, plug it in and see what you can come up with. And then it's like, oh, okay, I can rely on the best practices, but then you have to adjust a lot for the boss you're working for. You know what I mean? So, whoever's signing the paycheck kind of a thing. So they do have a lot of power, right? When they get to decide what color the curtains are going to be. So it's like, okay, you go, right? That kind of thing.
So I kind of wanted to get into like the best practices for a couple things. So I guess first I would love to start with writing conversations themselves. And do you have any best practices that you can share? And maybe Melody, do you want to start with this?
Sorry, did you say?
Yeah, Melody.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I didn't know.
Sorry.
Yeah, so I think you said writing conversations, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, so EJ mentioned this earlier, obviously the Jenga technique, really useful, fun way to start. I think in general for writing, just write down everything you think you need to get your point across, and then start finding ways to like shorten it, lose words, look for shorter ways to rephrase things, think about, what the messaging really needs to be. I think as well, really just deciding what is the point of this conversation, like what point A is and point B. Point B is probably a fixed place. Point A is sort of where you get like, what are the pieces of information you have that the user is dealing with, and what's necessary to get from point A to point B. So I like to write down like everything that the user could possibly be like kind of like dealing with, like this in terms of the kind of pieces of information that they have or don't have, and consider what's necessary and consider how to connect that information, and then kind of move forward. I think, yeah, and I think that's a good way to map out how to get there. And then I think the other thing that as a best practice, I like testing with stakeholders who aren't as close to the project, because they tend to have bring different perspectives that are helpful.
Anyone else?
I would like to add something. I try to identify a common pattern or sort of information architecture because I prefer to structure my messages. It also depends on the interaction style, if it is for voice or for text. Because for text, you can be more verbose, slightly more verbose. For voice, you have to be very, 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 very concise. Yes, testing is an essential element. And I also try to listen to other people talking because it is really, as a conversation designer, we should resemble not human communication. And sometimes when I write, I got involved in my thinking. And when I listen to how people talk, I go back to reality. And then I think, oh no, we have to cut this down, take off this word. There is also a technique, if I remember well, the Jenga technique that gives the idea. So it's basically removing unnecessary words, and you get the final meaning, which is very, very concise.
One quick best practice I will plug in is check out the market, look at your competitors and see what they're doing. So, I mean, I know that sounds like being lazy, but just see the people who are cranking out like really efficient, awesome bots. See what they do, line it up, look at the pros and cons, and often I bring that to my critiques or the early on design, and to show folks, hey, this is how these folks are doing it, and also connect with a lot of chatbots just for fun, just to be like, ooh, I wonder if that one's good. Like I know, EJ, you're at Amazon. I don't know if you've ever worked with Rufus, but I asked Rufus stuff and I'm like, ooh, I wonder if, Rufus can help me out with this, and just for fun, so, you're like, oh, that was a pretty good way that team handled it. And the funny thing is, I don't think of Rufus doing it. I know it's like designers behind the scene who set it up that way. So check out the market. I also, and this was about how to do the writing. I'll give you a quick example. We had kind of a sort of an annoying feature that we had to work on, and I'm trying to attack it. I'm trying to do this, that, what have you. And I come from a theater background. I'm a playwright. So I decided, okay, I'm going to write a monologue, and I am pretending to be the chatbot. And this is everything. I'm going to unleash everything out to the customer. And then in it, if you want to do the Jenga and strip things away, you can. And then you pull out, oh, this is what you really want. Because in plays, stories, etc., dramatic stuff, character always wants something. So the chatbot could also need certain information or whatever. We're trying to assist the humans to get what they want, right? But how does a chatbot, explain what they want in that particular moment? And so, so I wrote the monologue, and then I highlighted the most important words, and I shared this with the stakeholders. Be like, hey, this is my process. And I mean, maybe they might be like, I don't know. They might not have been really impressed by it or whatever. That wasn't the point. I was just showing this is how I work. Because sometimes I get stuck. So it's like, what do you do when you're stuck as a writer and you've been looking at this for days? So try other tricks and see. One thing I never did was work with another team member and ask them to pretend to be a frustrated customer. Let's record this, and then let's see how we can crank it out. And of course, you can go to transcripts. The call centers, you'll have a bunch of transcripts, and you can check out what is, the common blockers, etc., if you want to go down that path. But as a playwright, I know how to write a couple characters at the same time in a scene. So sometimes I write out, here's a frustrated customer, they want this, and the chatbot's trying to help, back and forth. So I use my theater, playwriting approaches, and I'm like, let's see if it works here.
That's amazing. EJ, you have any?
Yeah, so I like to look at obviously what the customer's goals are, what are they hoping to accomplish, and then what are they going to, what the utterance shapes are, the things that they would say to try to accomplish that goal. So I start there, and then also look at the endpoint, like what's success, what's what does it look like when the customer accomplishes their goals. So understanding those two various endpoints, then I use a language to kind of get from point A to point B, so to speak. So it may take various conversational turns. I usually will write out, like was just mentioned, a huge dialogue between the customer and back and forth, kind of imagining that conversational flow, and then strip out everything that we don't need and making sure that it's consistent with brand and tone. So I start with a bunch of information that I would like to write from the customers is saying what their utterances are, the things that they may say to express either their frustration or something that they would like to accomplish, and understanding what success is. And in between that, just writing out a whole entire dialogue between the customer and the assistant, and then what those various paths could be in terms of like error recovery and things of that nature. So, and then once I look at it as a whole, take out the things that we don't necessarily need and then test it. That's usually like a basic framework that I would work from. And it's something that you can use and kind of spin out prototypes relatively quickly and kind of get feedback on what you're hoping to accomplish, and kind of imagine the customer's journey through that particular experience.
Sorry, I wanted to bring up one more thing. Anne mentioned, Soo-Jin kind of touched on this a little bit, but Anne likes to start by listening to the calls if you have any, to see what the actual conversations are. And I think this is important to point out for like the kind of language that you're using to talk to the users and other stuff. So yeah. Sorry, Giulia, go ahead.
No worries. I think it's a great point. And yeah, I was wondering, we're talking about best practices, and I'm seeing generally in the chat, there's a lot of questions on LLMs and GenAI. So do you all have any best practices on integrating LLMs and GenAI in conversational experiences?
I think this can look one of two ways. Like either you're creating a bot that uses LLMs and you're creating it from scratch, or you're adapting an existing bot. And I think the latter is way more difficult than the former. I'm not sure that there's a standardized method for how that looks. If there is, like, let me know. I'm also curious. But I guess in terms of best practices, for me personally, as a designer, like sometimes I, am given the ability to show up reasonably early in that creation cycle, and I'm not like coming in at the end with no way to shape the LLM's output. Like that's going to look a certain way. I think it comes down to kind of measuring a few variables. So for me personally, I've measured for accuracy and relevance, but there's also stuff like computational cost or ethical considerations, or maybe even persona. Like, is it sounding a certain way? Is it aligning with your voice and tone? Yeah, this is such a wide open topic that it's sort of hard to like pin down, but I guess that's what's worked for me, is kind of developing that rubric on and kind of just testing incessantly and like working with others to test as well.
Yeah, I know the question is inherently broad, but I appreciate trying to put some guidelines there. Valentina, were you gonna?
Yes, I was about to say that, yes, I will start asking, why do we need to integrate a large language model at first? Because I think it implies bringing some more complexity to the project. But beside that, for me as a conversation designer, the big challenge is to understand in which part of the customer journey a large language model is better suited to replace the deterministic flow. For instance, I was struggling with a large language model with a prompt, and I found out that it was very difficult for a large language model to extract the precise date and time. And I thought to myself, okay, maybe another platform, just to say one, Dialogflow, which I have been used a lot. Dialogflow would be the best solution for this use case, because there are the system built-in entities that can resolve correctly date and time. So I think that the challenge here is to identify in which part of the customer journey or of the entire flow you might have a large language model take over the control instead of you doing all the hard work by yourself.
Go ahead, Soo-Jin.
Yeah, I wanted to throw in, with deterministic bots, if you ask a random question, this bot is probably not going to, if it's deterministic, it's not going to answer. And it always answers, I'm still learning. I'm sorry, I can't answer this. So in a way, if you have an LLM to come in and be like, hey, actually, and then pull from, like the RAG FAQ business, that helps. That can help, and your bot will seem much smarter than, can't help you right now, I'm still learning, that kind of thing. Sorry about, I'm not an actor, as you can tell. But it's that gets frustrating, and I think chatbots have a really bad reputation, and people don't want to engage because it's like, it's taking me nowhere. And so many times I've talked to people, like normal friends out in the community, and they're like, oh, telling me, the product that I'm working on is not great. It's okay. Honest feedback or what have you, whatever. It's a work in progress, right? So I think large language models can help with that sort of generic kind of answer, pointing people to, oh, you have a question about that. And then we have a encyclopedia of information that you don't want to dig through and find. Okay, well, let me go get that for you and bring it to you. But then there's always the problem with hallucinations too, right? Because if you ask something really out there, they'll come up with something. So you need those guardrails. The other thing is I've worked on checking out, data sets, right? And when all sorts of users are asking questions, how does the large language model reply? And then I'm an English teacher again, putting my hat on, and it's kind of like grading essays, or like, okay, we can say this better, etc. I've seen, a lot of, I've been in to help with that one turn answer, how to get that really tight and helpful, short, and then again, follow the persona of the chatbot. But I don't know, I will add one thing. When I've read transcripts of a human engaging with a large language model based bot, if the human's a good prompter and they know how to ask questions well, because they're like, a ChatGPT PhD, then woo, beautiful. You know how to cheat on this exam, right? You know how to get the right answers. So like, you're like, okay, you're an AI nerd who knows how to, use a large language model based chatbot. But a lot of people don't have that skill. In fact, there's a really low percentage of people who even use ChatGPT. And I was shocked, because I'm like, aren't more children cheating to get better grades? But of course, then you have to be motivated to even want the good grades, right? So that's a whole other subject. But again, it almost seems like it's so much in the hands of the human user. If you know how to manipulate and prompt and ask the right questions, you can get what you want. And again, you have to almost be an expert in that field that you're asking about, because if they give you a silly answer or an alternative fact, you're like, ooh, that doesn't sound right. I'm gonna look that up. I'm gonna fact check that. And so, yeah.
Yep, and just to chime in, just wonderful, because I agree that LLMs can do a wonderful job of just kind of handling like those basic FAQ experiences. But to your point, I think it's really important for the designer to go back and evaluate the responses of the LLM, just to make sure, one, there's not a hallucinating and it's staying within the guardrails. And if it is hallucinating, why? Understand it. Maybe we need to adjust the prompt that the LLM is operating from. And then maybe it's better off just to have a deterministic response there, just in case, just until we can kind of make sure the LLM is fully trained. So that's a very, very practical way of being able to kind of implement an LLM strategy within your customer experience. Because just like Valentina mentioned, why are we actually using this? Why are we interjecting this piece of technology here? Is it going to benefit the customer in some way? Or will it help our designers by kind of maybe offloading some of the things like the basic FAQ writing to the LLM? So we kind of want to make that evaluation. Secondly, I like to evaluate the responses from the LLM, because is it too verbose? Is it hallucinating? Is it providing incorrect information? So you want to make sure that the LLM is staying within the guardrails or parameters that you set.
So, Melody, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I guess I could. So we were talking about RAG and how that's a really great way to get accurate answers. And I think even within RAG, like one thing that I've found really helpful is to just go through the documentation that's being used. And I was looking for best practices on how to format that documentation, because I found that had a huge effect on like whether it was hallucinating, whether it was giving useful output. And I kind of just kind of came up with my own rules that seemed to like lead to more successful responses. I don't know if those work universally, but just kind of writing those out and keeping those in mind and sharing those out with people as needed was helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the biggest things, is just documenting when something works and sharing it with people, so we have a baseline and foundation to get started. So I know there are a ton of questions in the chat that we will probably not get to all of them on air, but if we don't, we will answer them in the chat after. But I do want to bring in this question about Wizard of Oz testing. Is Wizard of Oz testing still used for conversational AI, or have there been changes to this method? Or are there any other methods that have come around, especially with LLMs and GenAI?
Could I kick us off? So Wizard of Oz, that's like the OG method. I still use it. Like that's one of my core foundational methods to use, because sometimes you just need to go through the experience with the person and see how they enter, how your responses and the things that you're thinking of, the dialogue that you're looking to write, how people reacting to it. And you can get feedback that way. So that's a great way of being able to kind of test out your ideas and concepts in real time, just with people, especially if it's like Melody mentioned earlier, just bringing in stakeholders who are not as familiar with your process, and then see how they navigate that experience. So Wizard of Oz, for me, is an incredibly useful tool. So I still use it. So I just wanted to kind of say, hey, I know things are changing and technology is changing, but yes, let's still keep Wizard of Oz to the forefront, because it definitely does work.
Anyone else have any thoughts on testing?
Oh, I just want to throw in, it's a slight separate thing, because as a design team, we all have our fingers in the pot, right? We're all in the same kitchen. And I feel like if we are the ones, working on the Wizard of Oz testing, to have a very diverse team is really, really important. People from different backgrounds, different parts of the country, maybe people who speak several languages, right? And English is not their first. That really will help us catch like, ooh, that word is not appropriate or, anymore, because language keeps changing and shifting, right? And as a company, what is our value system, besides just making a bunch of money, right? Making a big profit, but, we want loyal customers, et cetera. So I just want to throw that in there, because then you're saving yourself possibly a lot of heartache later, right? Because if it's out in the wild, the product is out in the wild, and customers are offended, then, you lose, it makes your brand look bad. So I just want to throw that in there. That could be super valuable. And recently I've been involved in, working something out myself, and having a colleague who we don't have the same cultural upbringing, but she educated me on something, and it really, really helped me. And I dug into it more because I'm a nerd and I want to know why, what's the history of this, what's going on. And then I will, so being with people who might not share the same value system, different cultural backgrounds, languages, et cetera, upbringing, that is huge. And I don't think, I don't know when people get hired if that's always taken into consideration so much, like having the most diverse team possible. Yeah.
Anyone else?
I just want to chime in. To be honest, I haven't had any chance to do Wizard Force because I've always worked in very small team. But now I feel lucky because there is the voice interaction mode on ChatGPT. So you can sort of simulate a potential dialogue between you and the chatbot. So I think this is really useful. If you can't have real people, now you can rely on ChatGPT or other large language models. They might be helpful.
Definitely. So I did want to bring up one question that we had earlier. This is, I guess it's kind of related, but what are your best tips for fostering good relationships with developers? Do you recommend taking any courses for a better grasp of vocab? Are there any triggers or habits to avoid? How can conversation designers with no experience with coding or Python bridge the gap between us and conversation designers with more technical backgrounds? And I think this kind of goes to best practices with documentation and just communicating in general. So I was wondering if anyone has any thoughts there.
I'll throw in a very simple one. It should be an obvious one. Wherever you're working, become friends with, the most technical person on the team. And I did at one of the previous places I worked, and he was so excited to even explain things to me. So our meeting went long, and he's showing me this and that, and I'm like, oh my God, you're going over my head. But that friend at work, if you give props to, oh wow, what you're doing is very valuable, they're going to want to keep teaching you, and so have that sort of mentorship relationship. It's free education. You don't have to sign up for a course. This friend, you just text them and they're excited. So use your community, be buddies with, more nerds, and they will teach you. Oh my gosh, they love sharing. And so, I foster that kind of relationship, and that's huge. I think if you don't have any programming background, taking a beginner's Python course can be helpful. I started one with the Andrew Ng, and it was like $50. And the thing is, he's teaching people how to use Python, but really using ChatGPT to help you. So it's like the shortcut class, and I love it. I'm like, oh my gosh, wow, one more reason to love ChatGPT, right? Or any large language model that can help you with, programming, and you tell them what you want, and it's like, boop, there it is. Yeah, join communities. And also, I know people sometimes kind of roll their eyes at going to conferences, but actually, go check out a developers conference, and maybe you'll find your, niche, and you're like, ooh, I'm really into that. Let me, and so that's a great way to meet a ton of developers at the same time. And I don't know, it's just like network and ask folks, because your friends will help you.
I really love this idea about just like keeping in mind that like you can make friends with the people you're working with, and that's just going to make your entire working process so much easier. I think for me, like when I start a new project, I try to identify the developer, or like, the technical person who has the ability to explain things in a way I understand, because a lot of technical people, like they're like kind of stuck in their like really, really technical sphere where they might be willing to explain stuff to me, but like it doesn't necessarily go through because I have a certain way of thinking about things. So just finding that person who is able to kind of like translate things for me and is willing to do so, and kind of just latching on and being like, and just leveraging that connection as much as you can. I think the other thing to keep in mind too is when you're working with developers is just highlighting that you have the same goal at the end of the day. Like you might have different ways to go about it, but you both want to create a really good experience for the user. So just kind of explaining that, not explaining, but just like coming at it from a perspective of like, you're both there to do the same things. You're there to work with the developers and respect their processes, but also in turn, like it goes the other way as well.
And just continue to add there. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Valentina.
No, go on, please.
Yeah, just it seems like the key points that we're hitting home here is the relationship building. You want to have like strong relationships with your coworkers, especially engineers, because they're going to be the ones that want to help you understand the technical limits that exist, and with the designs that you will want to to prototype and to build. So that'll help you. And then the question was about like should I, taking Python courses and technical courses to help you kind of better be able to communicate with developers. They'll be able to pick it out, especially senior developers, even distinguished and principal developers. They'll know like you're like that you took a Python course. So if you're using language in that specific to their domain, they may get a chuckle from it. I think the biggest thing is one that course may help you just appreciate the technical limitations that exist when trying to deploy these solutions that we design. And I think that'll help. So like when you start to bring your ideas and concepts to the engineer, you can kind of work collaboratively from a place that's actually realistic within a certain time frame to be able to deploy. So I think taking that course can be helpful. I actually took a Python course as well. So that was helpful for me just to be able to appreciate things from a technical perspective. So yes, relationship building and also a technical course can be very, very helpful.
I would say that having and sharing a common lexicon would be super useful. I'm not quite sure that as a conversation designer, you should take Python classes. Well, it might be helpful to understand the technical constraints and platform limits and capabilities. But I think that a conversation designer should focus on user experience, the overall experience, and be at the intersection between language and technicalities. I'm lucky because coming from a technical background, I can talk to my colleagues that work in the research and development department. But I think that everyone should bring their own expertise at the table. Okay, if you want to take up Python classes, okay, go for it. I encourage women to go technical. I think it is very useful to learn how to code. It can help you in many different tasks for automation, for instance. But to work as a conversation designer, I would say that it is enough if you just understand, the technical limitations and you understand the developers' needs. They are users after all, so you just to be empathic with them as well.
Absolutely. And I know we're almost at time. Do you all have time for like one more question? Or okay. Giulia, do you want to ask one more? And we can wrap it up.
Yeah, sure. I'll ask one more question, I guess, on anything related to accessibility or inclusivity. So I know it's a broad, again, field. I don't want to make this like wash it over with a broad brushstrokes, but if you have any best practices or ways you approach this that you would be willing to share or that you would like to highlight as a last question.
Speaking of classes really quickly, a buddy of mine told me, check out multicultural marketing. That could really help you. One of the best courses I took when I was getting my education master's was multicultural education, because I was like, why do I need to take that class? I know what it's like not to be white in this country, the US. Hello, I can write about this. But when I took that class, it opened up my mind and in history. So I don't know. I think approaching maybe through the lens of humanities, if you want, even with accessibility, if you're interested in learning the history of it and technology and how that all intersects. I think for me, I like taking classes or listening to an Audible book. So, take a listen or even podcasts and join that conversation and know what the current thought leaders are thinking, or, how we're trending as designers in this world.
Maybe I can share just a couple, just quick tips that a person could consider when designing conversations, while including thinking about accessibility. So if you're thinking about designing for, say some of your users may not be sighted or may be hearing impaired, so you might want to take that into consideration. So if you're thinking about navigation instructions, very, very simple interaction. Where might you be trying to navigate a person to help them get to? So if you think that they're not looking at the screen, but maybe they're kind of tabbing through using their computer, perhaps you can say what you're looking for is in the main menu next to X or in the footer. So you can kind of let them know where the location is, because if they have like keyboard shortcuts, they may not be looking to the left or to the right or up or down. They may be searching for the footer or the left navigation or the main navigation. So that's one key tip that has kind of worked for me. A list of do's and don'ts, and that one in particular, just helping people navigate a website or a chatbot or a location by using just the location of that particular item within that, I guess, the web page, or so to speak.
I will say that if you care for accessibility, start thinking of integrating it as early as possible in the project. In the end, it's too late, in my opinion, and I've also experienced something similar. It doesn't work as expected. And also talk to people with disabilities, understand their needs, what their desires, and assume that you know anything about their issues. And so have a chat with these folks. It is really important to understand how to integrate accessibility.
I think something that I like to do in my spare time, and this is not connected to any work project, is I like to see how people in my life interact with technology, like voice technology. So I think someone mentioned ChatGPT voice. I like to see how my 7-year-old son like deals with getting the answer that he wants. I also like to see how other people in my family, like my husband or my parents, people who are of a certain age, or maybe they don't speak English with the standard American accent, kind of just seeing what issues that they deal with, whether the system understands them or not, or whether they have a certain way of thinking that might require going about it a certain way. That's just something that I think actually does help me when I show up as a conversation designer to do that.
With that, can I share a quick little funny moment? My mother, who is now 70, she is fascinated with Siri. She has an iPhone. And so we have Siri speaking Korean to her. You know, I'm from South Korea. And so when she told Siri, "You're dumb, you're stupid, Siri," I mean, just as a joke, right? I loved how the Korean conversation designers, I don't think it was an LLM, it was pre-ChatGPT, when we were testing this out, the Korean Siri answered, "I don't like that." And I was like, ooh, she's spicy, you know, or he's spicy, or whoever. I love, it was a female voice, but I loved how there was a little attitude coming back, you know, kind of like, don't treat me like that. Anyway, because it's funny, because in the past with voice assistants, I think they sort of flirted back a while back, and that was kind of a problem, I suppose. You know, some people viewed it that way. So I was like, and that's what it's fun if you can speak other languages, test out the other languages. Like, ooh, what does Italian Siri sound like when you say the same thing in Italian or whatever? So I like you, Melody. I like making these observations and testing stuff out with family.
Yeah, there's so much more we did not get to cover, like localization and yeah, so many other topics. But I will probably might need to do a part 2 of this. But I just want to say thank you all so much for being here. We're at time today, unfortunately, but there were so many great insights here, and I just really appreciate your time. And everyone else, stay tuned. We're gonna have more panels next year coming up. So I hope you all have a wonderful holiday, and thanks for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.